Hello, Anna. Welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Simon. I'm excited to be here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I read your little bio, before, long ago, I guess, when we reached out, and I thought, oh, that's a really interesting story. And for a couple of reasons. I love anything to do with SaaS because it's just where the world's going. But I love a story where somebody says, yeah, we kind of got offered we got an offer and decided not to take it, and went off and built and did some other cool stuff before you actually eventually exit. And I went, that's a story I'd love to hear. So I know I don't want to jump the gun here. I know we'll get to all that kind of good stuff, but maybe just for our audience, maybe you could give them a little bit of context and just explain some of your background and kind of what led you to starting your business.
Sure. So the company that I recently sold is called Boondockers Welcome. It is a online platform for RVers that lets them connect with other hosts, usually RVers themselves. And I know in Australia, you would call it caravanning probably, but in North America, we call it RVing. But other RVers who let them stay on their property for a night or two for free. So we call it kind of like the RV equivalent of couch surfing, but you bring your own couch with you. So
Cool.
I started that in 2012 with my co-founder, who is also my mother, who has been RVing for about 20 years and
Cool.
had a following online. She had already self-published some travel guides that she had a pretty good following for. And we were able to use the purchasers of her guides. She had built a good mailing list, and we were able to use that to sort of seed our initial host base and use that to launch our platform. And we grew to over about 3,000 hosts and over 12,000 guests before we finally exited in May of 2021.
Wow, that's a cool story. So understanding the origins here. So your mum has the experience of RVing. She's out and about. She's seeing kind of the need, I guess, in the market. And as I understand it, you're a software engineer by trade. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I have a degree in software engineering and was working as a full-time embedded firmware engineer while we were building the product, and then eventually did quit my day job to go full-time on Boondockers Welcome.
Cool.
But
Okay,
my mom she had all of the industry expertise. She was the RVer. I do have a camping trailer now, but when we launched, I did not. So she was definitely the subject matter expert.
Great. And obviously you've been won over with the idea along the way, which is cool. But that's great. I mean, I love the idea that you're doing a business with your mum, which that's pretty cool. I mean, not a lot of people can say they've done that. If my mum was still with us, I would love to have the opportunity to work with her and do something fun. But I love the fact that industry kind of exposure, look, ideas, even following, as you say, brought together with a tech solution. I mean, that's the future in my mind. So very, very good. So talk to me a little bit, if you can, about what the journey looked like. You no doubt you're probably sitting at the dinner table, maybe chatting about this idea, and how does it go from idea to actually you're starting to take it seriously and work on things and building maybe an MVP or something like that. Like what did that journey look like? How long did it take? All the rest of it.
Yeah, well, for us, the journey was pretty slow, but it was very much sort of a side project fun thing that we sort of started without really any anticipation of how much it would take off. Essentially, my mother came to me. I had just had my first child in, I guess it was late 2009. Probably it was 2010 when she sort of came to me with this idea. She had been RVing for some time and knew that this was something that was commonly done in RVing. You would, pull into a campground and introduce yourself to your new neighbors, and, you'd become fast friends and very quickly exchange cards with addresses on it saying, oh, if you're ever in my neck of the woods, come stay in my driveway. And even
Cool.
some of the RV manufacturers would sometimes have, print lists of other people with Airstreams that, if you're also an Airstreamer, you can come stay in any of these people we'll be happy to host you at their property, sort of. So, but it was a very low tech solution at that point, right? There was some kind of directory that you could maybe print off or have a copy of, but there was no sort of online version of this. And so she came to me with the idea that she wanted to launch that. And as I said, she already had sort of this following, and we knew we could sort of use that to seed it. She was actually, I think, asking really if I could give her advice on who to hire to build it for her. But I was on maternity leave, and we're in Canada. Here in Canada, we were lucky to get, a full year of maternity leave. And so I pretty much spent, the time when the baby was napping, and she would come over once a week and sort of play with her grandson. And I would spend that time building the site. And so we did that,
Cool.
on and off, and it was slow going. It was 2012 and after I had my second child, before we actually launched it. So it was that initial MVP took a long time, but I was not a web developer by background. I was a firmware engineer. And I mean, obviously there's some skill transfer between those two, but there was still a lot for me to learn. So I learned as I went. And then, we launched in 2012, and we had, I think we got our first 200 hosts within the first few months from that initial seed.
Wow.
And then it grew quite slowly for the first few years, as we weren't really putting a whole lot of time and effort into it. And then probably around 2014, I quit my full-time job, partly to work on the company, but also just partly for family reasons. And then by about 2016, when my kids finally started school full-time, I was able to focus more on the business, and we did a lot more marketing. And that's when things really started to ramp up.
Yeah, cool. That's really interesting. So obviously bootstrapped, self-funded, or I shouldn't say obviously. I presume
it was 100% bootstrapped and self-funded. It was the cheapest of cheaps at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I like this idea. I mean, you obviously had an idea, and you obviously thought it had merit to put some time and effort and all this sort of stuff into it. But it's I get the feeling. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the feeling that you maybe didn't realize what a success it could be.
No, I don't think. I mean, the online SaaS revolution, I think, was really just sort of coming into its own at that point. And I had, some inklings of, a few podcasts that I'd heard of and, little pieces on the internet that I had read about, but I hadn't really been drawn into this world of, you can make money writing software on the internet and actually build a business out of that. And especially, I live in a town that's the city I live in is like the home of the original BlackBerry research in motion. There's a lot of high tech companies in town, but all venture backed big tech companies. So the idea of starting something small and bootstrapped, just I didn't have any sort of examples of people doing that around me, so it wasn't really something that I had thought about prior to getting far enough along that I realized, oh, this is something that we can do, and people do this.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's very cool. And so, it must have been a pretty great feeling getting those first few kind of customers or people signing up and starting to use the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly remember that, moment when the first, we turned on the paywall and that first sale came in, and that was very exciting. And for a long time it was, one a week, two a week, and then eventually it grew, and we grew with it.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I think these days we're all quite familiar with this idea of Airbnb and these sort of things, but just to help me, I guess, and our listeners understand. So what was the model? How did it work? How did it actually commercialize?
Yeah, so we chose a membership model. So our hosts were able to join for free. Eventually, we didn't actually start with that model, but that was the model that definitely worked in the end. So hosts could sign up for free, but guests paid an annual membership. So it was, at the time we sold, it was $50 a year. So $50 a year, and that's for unlimited stays with all of our hosts. And the hosts, most of them were, like I said, RVers themselves. So they weren't actually in it for monetary gain. They didn't take money. There was no exchange of cash paid to them, unless some of them would offer like an electric hookup, and then you were expected to pay them for out-of-pocket costs. But most of them did it for the social interaction. So it was really an amazing deal if you were a guest to be able to stay at any number of our, at the end, 3,000 hosts. And there, I mean, the company still exists. So there are still 3,000 hosts out there around that you could stay with. So it's an amazing deal for the guests to stay with our hosts. And like I said, most of the hosts, either they are RVers or they're former RVers, and they really enjoy the lifestyle and enjoy the social aspect and meeting people. And I mean, we heard so many stories over the years of hosts who, couldn't travel anymore because they were too ill or they had to take care of a loved one, and that social piece, having people come and just share their property and share their lives, and how much that really meant to them. It was an amazing business to run. It gave you a lot of purpose. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's a community. It's a movement. I think that's great. It's so if I'm a host and I sign up and I'm signing up for free because I'm a host, do I also get to use the platform as a user for free, or do you pay as a user on top of that?
Hosts would earn credits for every guest that they welcomed. So you could host for free, and then every time you had a guest stay with you, you would earn essentially credit to put towards your own membership for when you traveled.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great. That's a good sense of actually, getting people active so that they're not. Well, let's be honest. There's always a few people who try to take advantage of a system. So, that's a nice way of putting it. So, yeah, really interesting. And so, when you started building this, and I guess sometime along this journey, as it's starting to get a little bit of traction, were you thinking about building it to sell, or was it more of a hobby, or what? Like, how did that come into it?
It was never really on my horizon at the beginning. Selling, it was, having an income stream was just such a magical thing at the beginning, right? The fact that we could, just the two of us, and it was really just the two of us at one point. A couple of years ago, my mother did sort of step back because she's, 70 now. So she wanted to sort of pull back and retire. And we hired a customer support and marketing community person to help take over for her. But just two people essentially running the company and bringing in this, relatively stable monthly revenue was just an amazing thing. And it wasn't necessarily something that I had looked towards selling while I was building it. But at some point, you start to recognize, this is an asset and it has value. And there are always risks associated with, running the company. And there are other reasons too that, like I said, my mother was retiring, and this was essentially at this point, her entire retirement nest egg all of her net worth was in this illiquid asset. So it really, at that point, it became sort of obvious that this was something we should be considering.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned risks in running business, and I guess my mind instantly jumped to, I guess, if somebody goes onto somebody else's property and has an accident or something like that. I mean, is that the sort of things that you're talking about? That stuff must have gone through your minds as you're building this business.
Yeah, I mean, lots of different risks, obviously, but that was one of them. And I mean, we did eventually, and we started out very scrappy without any of that sort of stuff, but we did eventually sort of introduce an insurance program to sort of protect ourselves and our hosts from any liability issues. But yeah, as we grew, we, learned how to manage those risks a little better. But at the same time, we're a small bootstrap company, Airbnb or couch surfing or something could decide to get into the space and throw a bunch of venture capital money in it. You never know what's going to happen, right? So there's always risks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating space. I think it's, and there's clearly a solid ongoing and probably growing market, particularly with baby boomers, retirements and all that sort of stuff. It's, yeah, I can see the scale and the interest. So, I'll go back to some of my opening comments. I understand that, you got an initial offer that you ultimately turned down. Can you talk about how did that come about and what was sort of going through your mind at the time?
Yeah, so this would have been in early 2019. At that point, we probably had about $100,000 of annual recurring revenue. So, enough to feel pretty comfortable with the two of us working at that. But, it wasn't really fully replacing my day job, but made me feel okay about not having one.
Yep.
But it was another player in the RV space who had some other sort of related websites and owned a couple of sort of RV related businesses. And he had reached out to us a couple of times. And at that point, I think I was just feeling, I don't know, a little low and not particularly motivated in the business. And my mom was looking to retire. She had not yet retired at that point. And so we decided to explore that. And he, made us an offer, which was, a perfectly reasonable offer. We had some advisors look at it. Like I said, we had about $100,000 in ARR, and the offer was, I think, it was around $380,000. So, a pretty good multiple. It wasn't necessarily the best terms. I think it was, a relatively small chunk up front and then sort of seller financed over the next 18 or 24 months or something like that. So that wasn't really the best terms, but we, we're considering it. And we're just about to sign the letter of intent when I ended up going to a conference where I just sort of, for the first time, I went to MicroConf, if you've heard of it, which is sort of a small conference for bootstrapped software founders here in North America. And I just really sort of found my tribe and met all of these amazing people who were doing similar things and many of whom were sort of not even at the point of success that we were at yet. And that really sort of invigorated me and made me realize that we actually had something here that was worth trying to continue to grow more. Yeah. So excellent. That's what we did. So,
yeah, that's cool. And just clarifying a couple of technical points for anyone who might be listening. So ARR is typically annual recurring revenue. So I think, Anna, we get a lot of different business owners who listen to the show, and a lot of them have traditional businesses as opposed to SaaS businesses. And so I think they're probably, anyone who's listened to the show a few times would be used to me talking about valuations often being a multiple of their adjusted profit or adjusted EBITDA, as the case may be. But if anyone's been listening to more recent episodes, we've had a lot more SaaS founders on, and this shift can be quite a paradigm sort of breaking idea for a lot of business owners that, hang on a minute, you're telling me somebody pays you a multiple of your revenue, not your profit.
I mean, so the truth is that I'd have to go back and look at those numbers, but it's such a high margin business that those numbers were so close to each other, right? And the seller discretionary earnings, like we didn't have any employees, right? That revenue and that EBITDA number were almost identical.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. And I think there's a lot of businesses that will look at, well, hey, we need to add in a wage for us. So there's lots of different calculations that'll go on in there for a lot of buyers anyway. But broadly, this concept, SaaS companies are selling at multiples of revenue, and I think that's the message here. I think is for a lot of business owners is that different styles of businesses are going very different valuation methods and multiples and amounts and as a guy who's around this all the time, we're selling 3 SaaS companies right now in our main business, Exit Advisory, and I still boggle at the fact that we're seeing offers at even 5-6 times annual recurring revenue for some of them, and I'm like, wow. As a buyer, I just couldn't imagine paying that. But then again, I'm not a global billion-dollar software aggregating company either, so I guess that's all in perspective. So what happened after that? So you've decided, I'm not selling, I'm reinvigorated. What did it look like after that?
So we ended up hiring someone, as I said, to take over my mother's sort of role. She had been responsible for a lot of the customer support piece and, the business development piece. I ended up taking over sort of a lot of that, the business development and marketing, and like, all of the financial management pieces. So that was sort of me coming from a CTO role more into a CEO role. And that was really interesting for me to sort of learn that and move in that direction. And we just continued to grow like gangbusters for another 2 years. And I mean, obviously that was 2019. And then by the beginning of, 2020, we all know what happened in March of 2020.
Yeah.
So we had 3 months really of quite depressed revenue at the beginning of the pandemic when everybody was sheltering in place. Nobody really knew what was going on. We were extending people's memberships for 3 months just across the board because people couldn't travel and they were asking for refunds. But then, once those initial 3 months passed and, people realized that RVing was actually a very safe way to travel, much safer than, staying in hotels or having to eat at restaurants or flying on planes. Then all of a sudden, everything we knew was just out the window, and it was just gangbusters like that for the next year until we did sell in May of 2021.
Yeah, interesting. I can imagine that pandemic, and certainly we had a lot of lockdowns in Australia. I mean, I know a lot of business owners who suffered through that period. But geez, I imagine there would have been almost a bit of pent-up demand too, right? Of people just itching to get out. They missed their holiday. They wanted. So I can imagine it probably came back in quite a flood.
It did. It was, we had hosts signing up. Even at the beginning of the pandemic, we had, people who had nowhere to go. The campgrounds were literally closing, and people who, live full time in their RVs and were getting kicked out of their campgrounds. And so we had people signing up as hosts, specifically taking in displaced RVers who had nowhere to go. We had, stories of people who ended up staying with hosts for a month or more, which is highly unusual because they just, or some people were here from overseas and they couldn't go back to where they were from. And it was a crazy time those first few months. But then, once the restrictions lifted, then everybody was in their RVs.
Yeah, interesting. And so when it came back around to you selling, I mean, did you make it? How did that unfold? Did you make a decision, we're going to sell, and start actively looking around? Did somebody tap you on the shoulder again? How did it sort of eventuate?
So we did not at all make a conscious choice and seek out an acquisition. We were still, growing, and I was still quite enjoying running the company. However, we had been in touch with, there's another company in the space called Harvest Hosts, which has a very similar business model to ours, where we orchestrated stays with private hosts who would let you stay on their property. They orchestrated stays with wineries or breweries or museums that would let you stay on their property. So small businesses, but it worked on a very similar business model. Again, an annual membership. And we had been friendly with their CEO for a number of years. I would chat with him every 6 months or so, especially during the pandemic. We touched base a couple of times, just comparing notes and seeing how things were going. A lot of our customers were also their customer, right? There was a lot of crossover there. And so he had, put a bug in my ear a couple of times before about, being interested in maybe acquiring us. And then in early 2021, I guess, they took, I think it was $37 million of venture funding. And shortly after that, I got a call from him saying, okay, can we get serious about this? What would it take? What would it take for you to sell? So it was just kind of a thing where it seemed like all the stars were aligned. It was, a really good acquirer for us. Like I said, all our customers were very familiar with them. They really understood our business. And it was very important to us that our customers and our hosts would still, have the same community that we had built, that wouldn't end up getting dismantled during an acquisition. If we had sold to somebody who didn't really understand the value of that sort of community, then I wouldn't have felt comfortable. But it was very clear that this was a good fit from that perspective. But then also, obviously they'd just taken this funding and they were looking to sell. And I also just, I know that RVing is still going strong, but it's at some point it's gonna come back down again. And I didn't want to ride it over the top. I figured this is probably, see if we can get out while we're at the top of the market.
Well, the going's good. Yeah, why not?
Yep.
And look, and I think, larger companies with venture capital and all the rest of it, I mean, they can take a longer horizon, longer term sort of look on things and ride out the next wave and all the rest of it. So I think that's a very logical approach for many, many founders. How long did the process take from them kind of reaching out to you and saying, hey, can we talk a bit more, through to finalizing a deal and it's all settled and finished?
So, I mean, I think they started reaching out to us sort of the beginning of the year. It was, I think it was sort of mid-March before we really got down to like, here's a letter of intent, and I, ran it by my lawyers. And I think it was April 1st probably was like the day we signed that letter of intent. And then we closed on May 14th. So It was a pretty fast turnaround once we finally did go ahead and decide to go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, and once again, I don't want to be assuming anything here, but from the outside looking in, I would have thought the due diligence process for you would have been pretty straightforward. Was it? I mean, I imagine they wanted to look at the tech and look at a few different things, but what was that like for you?
It was all new to me for sure. I mean, I assumed that they would, I'm a technical person. So I was like going in thinking, oh, I should be commenting my code more. There's not enough, clarity in here into what the code does. But as it turns out, and I didn't really know this at the time, but I mean, I should have figured this. I mean, their biggest interest was in our host base more than, our tech or any of that. So they have their own platform, and, their long-term goal was to, and they have done this now, to integrate the platform. So our Boondockers Welcome is still its own product, but it is a sort of an add-on to their Harvest Hosts product. So you can buy the membership to stay with the wineries, you can upgrade to our community membership to stay with Boondockers Welcome hosts. So for that reason, it turns out that the actual tech was a little lower on their list of things that they cared about. I mean, they wanted to make sure that, it wasn't going to break in the time before they could get everybody migrated over to their back end. But no, the due diligence process was much more just about, making sure that we had crossed all our T's and dotted our I's and weren't doing anything horribly illegal. And, it was still all encompassing, but not in the same way that I had expected it to be.
Yeah, cool. And so you mentioned you had lawyers obviously looking over the agreement. Did you just negotiate it primarily yourself, or did you have another advisor? Did you bring in, what did all that sort of little deal team look like?
When we were negotiating the actual purchase price, at that point, I did not yet. I guess I probably had a lawyer when we finally had the letter of intent, but when we were negotiating the price, we didn't have lawyers yet. We didn't use a broker or an official advisor. I do have some friends who are, in the VC backed world and have sort of a very good knowledge of, how company valuations work. And, if I was buying your company and it was a strategic acquisition, and this is sort of in the ballpark that I would be, willing to pay based on payback periods and sort of things. And so I had some of those conversations with some good friends and advisors in that regard, but nothing, cool. No official sort of advisor capacity. Yeah.
Yeah, but you went in armed. You had the context. You probably, you're armed with what they're going to the other side is likely to say to you or request or no, that's interesting. So you've actually done quite a quick sale there. I mean, beginning of year to May. I mean, it's funny. I always say to my clients when they approach us to allow for up to 12 months. You know, I say to them, look, I've had deals that have actually taken 18 months. I've had deals that have gone in 2 months, but 2 months is not the norm, and you should at least, allow for 12, and if I can get it done in 7 or 8, well, happy days, right? You get an early mark. But so for you to knock it over in what sounds like sort of under 5 months, maybe 4, is actually sounds to me like a pretty good and efficient process.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we hadn't necessarily gone in looking for that, but I had at least been smart enough to, make sure that most of our ducks were in a row before we started going down that road. Our books were, well organized, and we had things that were able to easily hand it over.
Yeah, cool, awesome. And so you finished up. Did you have to hang around for long? Was there a transition? Are you still involved? What did it look like after the deal was done?
Yeah, so I stuck around for 6 months transition as a contractor. And that was, like I said, they wanted to essentially integrate our platform into theirs. So it was mostly as an advisory role where I helped them make sure that they had feature parity with their platform so that all of our customer base would be able to sort of be used to the same process in booking stays with hosts that they were already accustomed to. So that was it. Sense. 6 months, and then I was done, and I'm no longer involved. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And for yourself, I mean, what's happening these days? What have you moved on to?
Well, I apparently love building companies now. So So I am venturing away from the RV space, but sticking with SaaS. I've started a new company called SubscribeSense, which is a marketing tech SaaS. So based on a sort of marketing issue that I learned about while I was running Boondockers Welcome, specifically, this company helps to increase the confirmation rate for double opt-in mailing lists. So email marketing in particular, trying to just increase the return on investment of that.
Yes, and what a big space and growing space that is. So sounds like you're onto a good thing there. I can't remember the exact figures, but I do recall. I think it was about 6, maybe 9 months ago when MailChimp sold for billions and billions and billions, and I lost count of the zeros there. But it was, I mean, talk about marketing technology being, the way forward. So sounds like you're onto an interesting area. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm so appreciative of you coming on and sharing your story with us. It's I'm always interested. I love hearing about entrepreneurs, their journey, and what happened, and the good, the bad, and the ugly, even, right? And we truly have heard it all in this show. But I do appreciate you taking the time and sharing that with us. Are you open to people reaching out and connecting? And I don't know, is SubscribeSense available for people to actually look at now?
So we are just onboarding our first beta customers. So if you're interested in checking us out, you can go sign up for the wait list, and we'll let you know when we're ready to bring you on. Cool. But if you just want to connect with me, and I'm always happy to share lessons or whatever, I'm probably on Twitter is the best place to find me, at Schoolgirl, where school is spelt SKULE, which is what we call the metric spelling. So that's a good spot to find me, or you can just email me at anna@subscribesense.com.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And obviously, I know you're on LinkedIn there as well, so we'll include some links in the show notes for this episode. But look, thank you once again for joining us. It's been really insightful.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Simon. It's been great.